So going through why aggregate demand has the shape that it does, typical downward sloping demand curves. So this is saying that when overall price levels in the economy increases, the quantity of overall demand will decrease. Or if overall prices drop, like your CPI drops, you have deflation, the overall quantity demanded in your economy increases. So let's go through why aggregate demand looks the way that it does in the overall economy. So already went through this. It shows you how the price levels in the economy affects the demand for everything in the economy. Just a quick thing on the price levels. This is the price levels of all items measured by the CPI. And this is the production of all items and the demand for all items measured by the GDP. So this is on the demand side though. So you can just see here that as prices go from P1 to P2, your GDP falls. So we want to explain that. Or if prices went from P2 down to P1, price levels are lower, your GDP increases. So there's going to be three effects or three reasons for this. So we're assuming that government spending isn't really dependent on price levels. So we have these other variables out there: consumers, investment, business spending, and foreigners. And consumption, investment, and net exports are going to change when the overall price levels change. So because price levels affect consumption, investment, net exports, then that tells you that as price levels drop, real GDP will increase and vice versa. So let's go through these three effects. So the first effect is called the wealth effect. And this is telling you that when overall price levels are lower, the overall consumption in your economy increases. So this one's pretty intuitive. Think about it: if you have $100 in your pocket, if prices of items drop, that $100 will make you feel wealthier. You'll be able to buy more goods and services, and your quantity of aggregate demand will increase. So that can help explain the reason why when price levels drop, quantity of aggregate demand increases in the economy. Kind of gives you that downward sloping demand curve that we just saw, and that's referred to as the wealth effect. So that one's pretty easy. Consumption increases when price levels are lower because people just feel wealthier, their money goes farther, they can consume more goods and services. So the interest rate effect, we'll explain this more actually a little bit in the next chapter, but the basic idea is that when price levels are lower, people don't have to borrow as much money, and since they don't have to borrow as much money, interest rates tend to fall. So think about it: people were demanding a ton of money, like everyone wanted to borrow money, that would probably drive up interest rates. So if prices are getting higher and higher, you need to borrow more to fund your lifestyle or to fund your business, so that would drive up rates. If price levels are falling, your money that you currently have goes farther, you don't need to borrow as much. So if people aren't borrowing as much, that puts downward pressure on interest rates. And so that's the interest rate effect. So this is the other effect why aggregate demand increases when price levels fall. And vice versa. If price levels rise, the interest rate effect would be usually higher interest rates, reducing the quantity of aggregate demand. So that's the second effect there, interest rate effect. And then the exchange rate effect. So if price levels fall in the United States, think about it: if prices are lower in the United States, then made in America becomes relatively cheaper. So people buy more made in America products. So quantity demanded will increase for U.S. goods. If price levels rise in the United States, then made in America becomes relatively expensive. People buy made in China instead, reducing the quantity of aggregate demand. So that's the third effect, the exchange rate effect. And you have the wealth effect, which affects consumption, the interest rate effect, which affects investment, and then here the exchange rate effect, which affects net exports. So what you can see here is if price levels rise in the economy, just to explain why quantity of aggregate demand falls. If price levels rise, consumers will feel poorer That's the wealth effect. Their $100 doesn't buy as much anymore if price levels are higher, so they cut back on their consumption. If price levels rise, people need to borrow more money to fund their lifestyles or fund their businesses, causing interest rates to rise. Higher interest rates cause people to buy fewer goods and services. And if price levels rise, made in America becomes more expensive, so you have the exchange rate effect, so people buy less made in America, reducing the quantity of aggregate demand. So what you can see is, first effect, higher price levels, you have a fall in aggregate demand because of the wealth effect, then also the interest rate effect, and then the third effect, the exchange rate effect. So this is explaining why aggregate demand looks the way that it does. And prices rise, quantity of aggregate demand decreases. Price levels fall, quantity of aggregate demand increases. So that's why the aggregate demand curve looks the way that it does in the overall economy.